Okay, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning from wherever you're joining us from today. Welcome to a Microsoft Reactor Sydney live stream event. Today, I'd like to bring to you the all-around Azure Unlocked Cloud Scale Analytics presented in the APAC region. We have our host here today, Fabio, who's the Chief Architect in Customer Success at Microsoft. He'll be moderating the session today. He's based in Sydney, Australia. You'll also see on your screens Martin Carney, who is a data platform Microsoft MVP and Telstra Purple ambassador, who's normally based in Melbourne, Australia, but joining us from Sydney today. And absolutely last but not least, we've got Hamish Watson at the top there. He is also a Microsoft MVP and DevOps and data consultant at Morph IT. He is also tuning in from New Zealand today. So for the session, we will be going for about 2 hours today, and in between each section, there will be about a 2 to 5 minute break, which Fabio will let you know when to come back on and off the screen. This is a Teams meeting, so please keep your mics and your cameras off throughout. Would be much appreciated. And if you could just ask any questions into the Q&A section and type it, and there will be time at the end for additional questions and to come off and speak on camera if you like. We'll be recording today as well, and will be available on our Reactor YouTube channel within the next 24 to 48 hours. We'll share with you guys the link to the YouTube channel. But for now, we should get into it. So I'll hand the floor over to Fabio to begin. So thank you so much, Fabio, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's always good to join you here at the Reactor. And thank you, Martin and Hamish, for joining me today for this session about cloud scale analytics, right? So, guys, let's get started. And let me set the context of what we're going to talk about today, right? The world of analytics is a rapidly evolving landscape, right? So every day we hear more about what is hot in the market, and pretty much on a weekly basis we see new technologies and new frameworks popping up, and so it's a fastly moving environment, and that represents a challenge for many organizations out there who want to leverage the power of data and the value, getting the most of the value out of the data sets that they have in their organizations. So look, we've been working together with small companies, medium-sized and large enterprise organizations in the commercial areas, in different industries, and also public sector. And we've been collecting feedback in terms of what are the most common challenges that prevent you from getting the most out of your data, right? And over the last 2 years, we've been learning a lot, and we're listening, and we took action to create the right artifacts and guidance for all of you to implement what we call a cloud scale analytics platform, right? In a way that you can have your Azure environment in a way that you can govern your data assets with security, with data quality principles in place, and still enable the business to create their own insights and provide the agility, right? So you have a middle term between control and flexibility, right? So today we're going to talk a lot about the cloud scale analytics. I'm going to start explaining exactly what's the problem statement and how we come about to create this concept of cloud scale analytics. Martin and Hamish, they will go deep into further concepts related to data mesh and what it means to implement an architecture following the cloud scale analytics templates in Azure. But let's get started. Right. So look, roadblocks that we heard from customers out there, right? So I said that we've been kind of doing a lot of research. Just recently, we run a technology roadshow with many different CDOs around the country and around the world, listening to them and try to understand exactly what is it that keeps them awake at night, and what are the major concerns. Right, the data governance, for example, is one of the big topics at the moment that keeps them awake. So many different legislations around data privacy and data security, and CDOs, for example, they expressed their desire to have a better control over the data sets. But that was not the only one insight that we got from this study, right? We kind of collated all of these responses, and we managed to group these different responses into these buckets that you see on the screen right now, right? It's into complexity, uncertainty, governance, scaling, and time to value. Let's talk a little bit about each one of those, right? So the first thing that we heard from our customers around the complexity is around scalability, right? So every single day we have different data challenges, right? So over the last few years, we saw the explosion of big data architectures that not only change the shape of the data sets that we deal with, right? So where we used to have most of the data sets being relational data sets, now we have unstructured data sets, semi-structured, that come in batches, that come in real time, and the number of technologies involved in managing these different kind of analytics use cases make the environment quite complex. And if you don't embed principles in your architecture, you may find yourself painted into a corner as you go through the addition of new use cases into the architecture and you realize, oh, my architecture here, I can't plug in this new use case. I'll have to rejiggle my components in order to achieve this level of scalability. So that was one of the concerns that we heard, and that came aligned with the fact that this complexity is also aggravated by the fact that we also have different people roles playing with data, right? So we have these satellites of different data people, right? You're here talking about, for example, data analysts consuming data. We have a data stewards responsible for the data governance. We have data engineers, data scientists, and all of them have slightly different requirements in terms of what they want out of their data sets, right? So, and we have to please them all, right? There's no way we can actually prioritize any of these roles. We have to find a way to meet all of their requirements, right? The other aspect that we heard loud and clear from CDOs and from our customers and partners is the fact that there's a lot of uncertainty with this rapidly evolving landscape of tools and options available, right? So you can imagine that 4 years ago, what was the best tool to handle big data workloads is now on its way out, and there is a new kind of engine in the market to handle data assets. Here I'm talking about, for example, Hadoop, and now Spark, for example, right? There's a constant change in environment, and that's a concern shared by CDOs out there. And at the point that we heard this feedback, there's also a lack of clear guidance on how to do things, right? So one common question that we at Microsoft heard very often from our customers is, Microsoft, please tell me, how should I do this, right? It's awesome. I understand exactly all of these concepts about analytics, but okay, good, awesome. I understand the what, but tell me how, right? So, and that's exactly what we aim to address with the cloud scale analytics, right? So hold your horses a little bit. We're going to get there. Governance, again, right? I mentioned before, that was one of the loudest messages that we heard from CDOs, is the need for facilitated data governance. And the data governance is an interesting one, because this exercise is not just about technology, right? Of course, Microsoft can have the technology that's going to help you with data governance, but data governance is also a people and process exercise as well, right? So there's a lot of people in terms of skills, in terms of responsibilities, and processes in terms of how data sets are being used and consumed, and what's the procedure to gain access to data sets. So all of that plays a role in having the right level of data governance into data sets. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of legislation now that is aimed to protect data privacy, and any organization that contains PII sensitive data sets should by now have at least the embryo of what is a good data governance process there, right? So prioritizing security, it's also kind of conflicting with the requirements for flexibility, right? If you can imagine that you have a kind of straight line, you have control on one end and flexibility on the other, right? You're gonna have to land here somewhere in the middle, right? If you prioritize security straight away, you can steer for flexibility. So if you go through flexibility, you may lose control of your data sets, right? So you're going to have to land somewhere in the middle. And Azure will help you by putting the controls in place where you can actually kind of move the slider one way or the other, right? Skilling, right? Skilling, that was another concern as well. Just aligned with the uncertainties, the constant change of technology, we also heard that many of our customers are still quite immature in their cloud journey, right? So customers actually, we have customers and partners at different levels of that cloud maturity. Some are really well advanced and taking full advantage of the power and flexibility of that cloud provides. Some others are still in the beginning of their journey, right? And that's just natural. And it's also natural that many of these customers will still have the on-prem skills really kind of sharpened, right? But not so much the cloud skills. Doing things in the cloud changes a little bit the way you do things, right? You have to think about the consumption and what it means to build solutions for the cloud so you can actually harvest the most of the benefits. So skilling was also another point of consideration, right? Time to value was also one of the most important messages that we heard. There was this kind of general feeling that it takes a long time to get to insights, right? And here when we investigate the root cause of this perception, it's not always related to technology. It's also about the way people and processes are organized, and they're creating kind of processes bottlenecks for data artifacts to be created, right? So it can take many months if you go through the regular central IT-led kind of data projects in the business. It's very common to get business frustrated. They've been waiting for data for months. And at some point it says, okay, I'm not going to wait anymore. I'm going to create my shadow IT department here. I'm going to hire some data specialists. I'm going to do things on my own. And the creation of these shadow ITs represents kind of a risk in terms of the governance that needs to be addressed by the business. But of course, we are here to explain how all of this can be managed and facilitated through cloud scale analytics. Right? Fantastic. So now that we set the scene in terms of what are the most common problems that we heard from our CDOs around the world and based on the research that we've done with customers and partners, let's talk about exactly what is cloud scale analytics. Right? So cloud scale analytics is our prescriptive guidance on how you should do things in Azure. And how you do things in Azure, I mean, how you should organize your Azure resources, how you should manage security, how you should organize your teams, what are the skills that you require to operationalize your cloud environment, right? So all of these guidance followed by artifacts, deployable artifacts and templates and reference architectures, right? That is all embedded in a documentation under our cloud adoption framework that we now call Cloud Scale Analytics, right? So I'm not sure if you guys ever heard of the CAF, which is the Cloud Adoption Framework. The CAF is, again, it's our guidance in terms of how you should approach your cloud adoption. You have to, the Cloud Adoption Framework define the different kind of phases in terms of to envision what you want your mission with the cloud, what are your objectives. You get ready to plan your deployments, you get ready to provision your workloads. There's a kind of a sequence of steps on how to manage and operationalize and organize the team. So it's all part of the Cloud Adoption Framework. And Cloud Scale Analytics builds on top of the well-defined Cloud Adoption Framework, right? The guidance that we created with the Cloud Scale Analytics also follow the principles defined by the well-architected framework. When you look at the well-architected framework, it defines 5 different pillars of what we believe are qualities of strong cloud solutions, strong and reliable cloud solutions. Here I'm talking about operational efficiency, security, right? Performance, cost optimization. Right? All of these principles have been embedded in the artifacts that we're going to talk about today here as part of cloud scale analytics. Right? This guidance gives you all of the knowledge required, for example, in terms of reference architectures, how you should organize my Azure environment, how many subscriptions, what kind of resource groups, what are the services that make up my analytics environment that gives me the ability to grow as my use cases come up along the way, right? This is also not only guidance and documentation, but also, as I said, artifacts, right? I think Martin today is going to illustrate where to find these artifacts on the GitHub repo that you can actually deploy this entire infrastructure that leverages a lot of automation, right? So you can imagine that a business unit for you to one day can say, hey, I would like to have an environment where I can work on data assets and create these artifacts so I can leverage the full power of the data sets that I have access to without depending on IT. And all of these deployment templates, they allow you to create this environment in an automated fashion and still keep control over what is possible in that environment, right? So that's the concept of policies that you're going to explore a little further on today, right? It also has assessments as part of the cloud scale analytics, just to see exactly where you are in your maturity for your data strategy, understand exactly what kind of workloads will be required based on your specific use cases, and what kind of DevOps processes you have in place and how you can leverage these full automation capabilities that Cloud Scale Analytics provides as part of the platform, right? So all of these assessments will help you understand exactly where you are, so you know exactly what you're going to need as part of the deployment. And finally, of course, skilling resources that will be required to support the platform, right? So although the Cloud Scale Analytics takes care of a huge number of different types of workloads and streaming and AI, right? You don't need to scale your environment to support all of them from day one, right? Get go. That can be a journey, right? The same, likewise, your skilling plan also should be aligned to that journey. Let's pretend, for example, that now your most immediate needs is, for example, to have a data lake for some big data analytics. Your skilling plan should be aligned to that. If further down the road you require some AI skills, that's fine. I can add the artifacts that make up this environment, so I can actually now have access to the technology that's going to allow me to run AI workloads, and also align to that, add to my skilling plan all of the training required for people to operationalize that environment, right? So that is the definition of cloud scale analytics. Just a summary again, it's our prescriptive guidance of how you should create an environment and operate this environment, right, in a way that you can provide the business the flexibility that they need to create the kind of data artifacts in the potentially federated way. We're going to talk about that, and also the ability to automate through the utilization of these predefined deployment templates and skilling plans that we have there. Guys, I'm going to pause here, just check if there are any questions in the chat. I don't see any at the moment. Please, if you have any questions, please put in the chat. I will be looking at that, and we can go along the way and talk about some of your questions. Let's keep going. Look, one thing that we, Microsoft, we investigate and we realize that most of our customers and partners and organizations out there still had the model where IT was centralizing not only the ownership of the technology assets required to run a data platform, but also centralizing the development of these assets, right? And we realized that stifles flexibility, right? There's only so much IT can do in the resources that they have, based on the knowledge that they have about data sets, right? So of course, that we know that the business users, they will know more about the data sets than IT. And we hear more of these standards popping up in the industry around the use of decentralized models and federated models for data ownership. So we are moving away from the centralized IT-led, where IT owns everything and owns the development, to a model that IT is the enabler of a platform where the business can have access to data assets that can develop on their own, with the right level of governance applied to those environments, right? So you see on the left-hand side of the slide, in centralized data ownership, where IT centrally owns the data in all services, we're moving to a federated model where we still have a collection of shared services, and that's okay, right? So there's a number of services that will be shared by everyone, but we can still have at the edge different business units implementing their own data assets in a federated on the data ownership model, right? The moment that we see this movement needs to be followed by a strong data governance, right? So if you're delegating the responsibility of the development of data assets and the control of data assets to the business, it's assumed that data governance needs to be in place. So in the business, they understand exactly what it means to be a data steward, and what's the responsibility of data stewards to protect and define the data sets of that specific domain, right? And inside that team, they will have developers and data analysts that will be responsible for the development of these assets, and be responsible for the security and sharing of these data assets. So the ability to have policies and standards in place will give you the guardrails that will protect your data platform, right? So the moment that you put the guardrails in place by defining standards and policies, you're guaranteeing that no one's going to step out of these lines that you define as part of your policies, right? So that is what we want to do. So we want to enable flexibility, right? Remember that line in terms of control and flexibility. You're going to land somewhere here in the middle. And it's not full flexibility, because that can be problematic. It's not absolute control, because that stifles flexibility. It's somewhere along the way that you can have enough controls to guarantee security and privacy, and still allow the business to move ahead and have their own data artifacts developed. Any questions here about this model that we can see on the chat? No, not yet. No problems. All right, let's keep moving then. Let's take a step back here a little bit, right? So you might be thinking here, Fabio, it's all well and good, right? I understand exactly what you're trying to say. I think that my organization is going through these exact symptoms of being business units being frustrated with the fact that IT is taking maybe a bit too long in meeting their requirements of their data projects. But Fabio, tell me, okay, how do I do this, right? How do I move from this model into a model that will enable flexibility and control? Before I go there, let me give you a piece of knowledge that is required for the cloud scale analytics, right? So I'm not there yet in the cloud scale analytics. I need to introduce you this concept, which is fundamental to the understanding of cloud scale analytics, which is the concept of Azure landing zones, right? I'm going to move to the next slide here to kind of bring the diagram a little bit. Let me just see if I can actually. Yeah, there you go. The cloud adoption framework, in its ready phase of the cloud adoption framework, it talks about the concept of enterprise scale landing zones. And what this is again, it's our prescriptive guidance in terms of how you should organize your Azure environment in a way that it allows segregation of duties and flexibility and security and networking, connectivity, right? And still provide a scalable environment for my workloads to grow, right? And when you get to learn more about what these landing zones, enterprise scale landing zones define, you see here on the screen, for example, that your Azure structure, the way we recommend you to do it is to make sure that you follow the principle of subscription democratization, right? You should be able to give business users subscriptions for them that they have ownership of that subscription, right? That's an Azure environment. In that subscription, there are many different ways for you to control, for example, what can be deployed in that subscription through policies and budget controls and everything, right? And they will have the authority to do their own work. But before going there into your work, let's just understand a little bit in terms of what this means, right? In your Azure tenant, of course, an Azure tenant is controlled by your Azure Active Directory identity here at the top, right? There's a concept of management groups, right? Inside Azure AD, management groups, it's a hierarchical structure that you can create, right? It's an organization methodology, right? You can see here that there's a root management group, and below that you can create up to 6 different levels of classification of workloads. Let's put it that way. And the way we would recommend is, for example, you should have a management group called platform, and right next to the platform, you have your landing zones. You can have decommissioned workloads, decommissioned subscriptions. You can have your sandbox environment, right? And for each one of those management groups, you can have the further levels down, right? Let's talk about the platform management group here, right? In the way enterprise scaling zones enable this flexibility. Excuse me, there's an echo coming. Oh, can you put yourself on mute, please? Thank you. In the platform management group, you see here that we have identity management and connectivity management groups. So what we want to do with this is you're going to have different subscriptions for each one of these components. We're going to have one subscription that manages all of the identity resources, right? That's a kind of isolated subscription. This way you can, for example, guarantee that only the security team will have access to that subscription and can manage domain controllers, DNS servers, and everything that's required to identity, right? You can put in there. You're going to have a management subscription here at the bottom, right? That's where you put all of the artifacts that are related to the management of your cloud platform. And here I'm talking about Azure Monitor logs, log analytics kind of workspaces. You can put all of your automation jobs that require kind of the centralization of the platform in there. Right? That's part of your management subscription, and then again, you can delegate the administration of those resources to the ops group. Right? The connectivity subscription is where you're going to have all of the artifacts related to connectivity. Right? The hub VNet, right, that connects back to on-prem. You're going to have the Azure firewall that controls all of the rules in terms of traffic going out to the internet or going back to on-prem. Right. So all of these artifacts related to connectivity live in that centralized connectivity subscription. And then once again, you can delegate the administration of that subscription to the networking team. So here I am promoting the segregation of duties instead of having multiple kind of groups managing everything. So by keeping these resources separate, it's a better way to centralize, to of course, control the costs based on each type of platform component, but also to implement a segregation of duties between these components. But the most important thing in terms of here for cloud scale analytics is the definition of what we call a landing zone subscription, right? The landing zone subscription becomes every workload that you want to put in place, every project or every business unit who wants an environment is the concept of a landing zone, right? Which is a subscription where all of the resources required for that specific workload will live, right? If this workload requires connectivity back to on-premises or to other resources or out to the internet, there will be a virtual network inside that landing zone subscription that connects to the hub. And from the hub, of course, traffic will be routed out to the internet or back to on-prem to access any data sources or destinations that your projects may require. But the idea is that you can have many of these landing zone subscriptions based on the different workloads that you have. By having different subscriptions, you can assign ownership to the business different units that they belong to. You can have different costs, different tags, and have budgets assigned at the subscription level. You can have policies assigned based on what's going to be deployed in these subscriptions, right? That allows the kind of fine-grained control over how these workloads, what these workloads represent, if they are dev workloads, if they are production workloads. And these can all be managed by policies, Azure policies, that you assign either at the subscription level or even better, at the management group level up here, right? When you assign a policy at the management group level, all of the subscriptions under that management group will inherit the policy, right? So let's just imagine here one example of policy that affects data projects. Let's say that one of your policies states that, hey, if you want to provision a data lake, that's fine. I'll give you permissions to provision a data lake, but you can never provision a data lake with publicly available containers. That's a policy that I can put in place and assign to a specific subscription or to a management group. That means all the subscription will inherit that policy. And if you are a CDO, for example, you can go to bed and have a good night's sleep knowing that the policy will never allow anyone in those subscriptions to create a data lake account that you have a public container, right? Because the policy enforces that rule. And that's how you control that. Remember the flexibility versus control, right? By having the right policies in place, you allow them to be flexible and create the artifacts that they need to be successful, but at the same time, making sure that you have the right controls in place to ensure security and privacy, right? Guys, I'm going to stop here. I've just dumped a lot of content on your labs. Just wanted to see if there are any questions. I see a question in the chat window from Balaji. Let me just read this question. How do you make the framework different for different industries? Finance, pharmacy, defense. Would their data be stored away from the office premises? Okay, let me see if I can understood this correctly. Look, this model of enterprise scale landing zones, it's industry agnostic, right? At this point, it's industry agnostic. So any industry can benefit from this format. If you want to make sure that we are, for example, are compliant with the regulations applied to each one of these industries. For example, when you look at the finance industry in Australia, there's a lot of APRA regulations. When you look at defense workloads, for example, or even healthcare workloads, we have to make sure that they contain PII protected level data, right? And the way to make sure that we have compliance with these different industries and have the right levels of control in place to make sure that you can actually put data in the cloud can be done via policies. These policies that I've just mentioned before, in the Azure portal, you have the concept of initiatives. And initiatives is a collection of many different policies. And these initiatives can be used to implement specific compliance regulations, right? So if you go to the initiative, you see that, for example, there is an Australian protected workloads initiative. So when you apply this initiative to your subscriptions, there's a collection of policies that will be in place that will actually obey all of the regulations of what it takes to implement protected level workloads in Azure in Australia regions, for example, right? Does that make sense? Based on the different types of industries, different types of regulations of what's going to be required, you have the ability to have different types of workloads specific to these industries and still have the right levels of compliance and security applied to your data assets based on what's going to be required. Balaji, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks, Fabio. Yeah, it answers. So I have recently heard that like Microsoft is building private clouds for different industries. Is it to do with like the same thing policies as you mentioned?
Yeah, look, the Azure regions in Australia, we have 4 regions in Australia, right? So we have the Choose Australia Central Regions, right? And the data centers behind the Choose Central Regions, they were built at SCEC level 4. If you look at the SCEC level 4, which is specification for data center construction, that's the kind of physical construction of the data centers required to host all the way up to top secret information. So the 2 Australia Central Regions, they run in buildings that have SCEC level 4 security applied to them in terms of physical access and redundancy and generators and powers. There's a whole bunch of controls of SCEC level 4, right? The other regions in Sydney and Melbourne, they are SCEC level 3 all the way up to protected level, right? So the services have also been certified for protected level workloads. So uh, uh, all of the data services, SQL database, Power BI, Data Lake, they're all certified for protected level workloads. So you make sure that once you have the right controls in place, you can be sure that your data assets in Azure will be secure. Okay.
Thanks.
All
Yeah,
right.
thanks.
My pleasure. So let's keep moving here. Let's talk about cloud scale analytics, right? Look, remember when I talk about the data landing zone, right? Sorry, the data, the landing zone subscription. So there you go. The name failed me now. The concept of a federated environment for cloud scale analytics will still have a number of artifacts that are centralized. For example, imagine that you only want to have a centralized data catalog all of your data assets, right? So it kind of pointless to have multiple, otherwise you wouldn't be able to find the right data sets in your organization. So you want to have a kind of a centralized data catalog, which is in the case of Microsoft, which is Purview, for example, right? So Purview should live in a subscription that is centralized, which is exactly this data management landing zone. The concept of a data management landing zone is a subscription that will host all of those centralized artifacts that will be reused by multiple business units as they implement their own data products, right? In the data management landing zone, we're going to have Purview accounts, we're going to have automation jobs, right? Azure Functions, Azure Key Vault, all of the central components that are reusable. And you can have one or multiple data landing zones, right? And data landing zones are the subscriptions that will contain your data lakes, your Synapse workspaces, your Databricks workspaces, your Azure Functions, or anything that is required to build your data products, right? They will all be part of these data landing zones. It's a one-to-many relationship. Do you have to have many data landing zones? No, not really, right? Not really. But that gives you the ability to grow if that's the case, right? So when you look at what what Martin and Hamish will show in the middle of in the next sessions, we're going to go deep into what's the structure behind in each one of these data management landing zones and data landing zones, and how to implement, for example, the concept of a data mesh in Azure following this model, right? So inside each one of these uh, landing zones, we're going to have artifacts. I'm going to show you exactly what they look like in a second. But before I show you that, I also want to talk about that cloud scale analytics is not just about technology. I also mentioned to you that it's also important to understand exactly what are the roles that make up the operationalization of that environment. And part of the cloud scale analytics is the definition of the different types of personas involved in this federated model, right? If I start here from the bottom up, right? So you can see here that in blue, we have the control plane access from the data, from the Azure perspective. And then here in gray, we have the data application teams, right? So from the bottom up, This team of the platform ops is defined by the cloud adoption framework. It's made up of cloud engineers and solution architects, and these are the guys responsible for all of the Azure platform automation, for example, all of the components that it will be provisioned as part of any Azure workload will be kind of centralized and defined and managed by this platform ops, let's say, team of people, right? Right above that, we have a specialization of that team, which is the data platform ops. Whenever a business unit or a team wants to have, hey, Fabio, can you please give me a subscription so I can actually create some data assets? There is a team who's going to be responsible for defining what is the template of that subscription, the resource groups, and what are the services that will be provided as standard and fully automated and as part of the deployment in the platform, right? There is a data landing zone ops. The guy is responsible for actually provisioning these subscriptions, these data landing zones. And finally, the users of these structures, which is the data application teams in each one of the business units. Of course, if we're talking about having proper data governance in place, there will be a data steward who is going to be a kind of active user of these data assets, maintaining control and documenting and making sure that everyone understands exactly what data means and how it's supposed to be used. And you have a collection of data scientists, machine learning engineers, and solution architects who will be building the artifacts to finally be consumed and used by decision makers and data analysts, right? So have a look at the documentation that we have available in the cloud analytics, cloud scale analytics, and there's a kind of a very thorough description of the skills required by each one of these roles as part of your environment, right? So just pay good attention to that because it's not always about technology. It's also about people and processes and how things should be put in place to allow full flexibility and automation, right? Right. This is what a data management landing zone looks like, right? So when you go through the GitHub repo for the cloud scale analytics and say, okay, I want to deploy that. I want to see what that looks like. I want to be able to create this environment that I want to be, implement a kind of data mesh architecture and grow my architecture there. So in a data management landing zone, what you're going to have is you're going to have a subscription with a collection of resource groups, which will contain all of those centralized resources that will be required by your data platform, right? And here, as I said, per view account, you only need one per view account for your organization, right? It can grow well enough and accommodate all of your data assets. This way you have your centralized catalog for assets, right? Key Vault becomes a kind of all of the secrets that will be used for the platform automation is going to be centralized there. All of the data quality, data share, master data management kind of solutions can be centralized in data management landing zone, right? Any other automation functions that will be required by your environment will also be there, right? And here you can see on the right hand side, from a connectivity perspective, right, all of the different data landing zones will be peered through VNet peering to the data management landing zone, right? From a connectivity perspective, right? So if I'm a business on a business unit and I have my own subscription and I'm building data assets, I want to make sure that, for example, that my data assets are registered in that purview catalog, right? But for that, I have to make sure that I have the right level of connectivity between my data landing zone and the data management landing zone, which is that central kind of control plane, right? So VNet peering is going to enable the connectivity in a bit of a, can be a kind of a hub and spoke model between all of the data landing zones connected to the hub, which is the data management landing zone. But if you want connectivity in between data workloads, you can continue to map, to pair the different VNets through the different landing zones and create the mesh connectivity in place. right? So this is what a data management landing zone, when you go through the deployment through GitHub, is going to deploy in a structure with resource group with all of these artifacts there. And in a data landing zone, for each one of the landing zones that you create, you're going to need, for example, artifacts that you'll be responsible for, let's say, data ingestion, right? So, okay, how am I going to handle data ingestion? So all of the services related to data ingestion will be deployed in your data landing zone as well, right? So you can have Synapse Pipeline, Spark, Databricks, Data Factory. You can have metadata databases available for Data Factory. Event hubs, if you're actually ingesting streaming, will be deployed in a resource group that is, okay, these are all the components related to data ingestion. And then you're going to have, for example, shared components in each one of the data applications that will make sure that you're going to use all of the data that was ingested by that layer. You can have many of these data products represented here by different resource groups, right? And finally, of course, these different data products will result in data sets that need to be shared with the rest of the organization, right? These will be data sets shared via, let's say, Azure Data Share, or put in a data lake for consumption, or through Power BI reports, or any other fashion that we want to share data, right? So this is just a kind of a bit of a picture of what data landing zone looks like. But look, I see some questions here in the chat. Let me go through some of those and address that. So are there any policies that can protect the data plane, or policies are only providing governance over the control plane and services? Very good question. In Purview, we also have the concept of data policies at the data plane level, right? So if you recall, if you cast your memory back, Microsoft acquired a company called Blue Talon. I think it was around 2 years ago, that was specialized in policies at the data plane level. You can, in plain English, say that any data sets that contain PII information, and that's, of course, it's a metadata-driven approach, you can say that any PII data sets can only be read by this specific group of users. That's a policy that you put in place, and this policy is going to be enforced across all of the data sets that contain that tag PII data, right? So there is a possibility of applying data plane policies as well beyond just the control plane policies, right? Question from Anchor. What is the actual physical service behind data management landing zone? I just showed you that in the previous slides. Anchor, so let me go back. You see all of the services that make up a data management landing zone, right? So Purview is core, right, for the data catalog, business glossary, all of those insights and data classification and lineage of your data assets, right? That's Purview's responsibility. And of course, there's a lot more coming into Purview around data quality. That's going to come in very, very soon as part of the roadmap for Purview. There's more and more data governance being embedded into Microsoft Purview, right? Are these slides going to be made available? Yes, we can make the slides available. I'll work with Sarah to find a kind of a way to share these slides. And the next question here from Cecilia, where the data engineer role fits on this. I think you saw the data engineer here on the top as being a machine learning engineer or data engineer. They make up the data application team, right? They'll be one of the guys responsible once they have their environment that can work on data engineers, machine learning engineers, data scientists. They'll be working together to build the data products in their own subscriptions, in their own data landing zones, right? So another question from Anchor. So these zones are just essentially different VNets. It's a lot more than that. It's not just VNets. These different zones, they will have their VNets, but not only VNets, they have a lot more artifacts, as you can see here on the data landing zone, right? So a lot of different artifacts that make up ingestion, storage, processing, enrichment through machine learning, and serving data sets. All of these artifacts make up a data landing zone. VNet is one of the components to allow connectivity back to the rest of the organization, right? So, team, we're gonna have a Ask Me Anything session at the end. I just wanted to stop here and pass the baton to Hamish for the next session. We're gonna have a break of 5 minutes, and we're gonna come back very, very soon for the next session with Hamish. Thank you. Hamish, ready when you are.
Cool. Alrighty. Thank you very much. Thank you, Fabio, for a wonderful introduction to all of this. I really appreciate that. All right, g'day everyone. So yeah, I'm Hamish Watson from here in Christchurch, New Zealand. So part of the intro that Fabio's done is although Microsoft is providing, that data mesh solution, it's important that what Microsoft is doing is not, it's not about a defined framework. And basically the approach that Microsoft has done is focusing on the challenges that organizations, they want solutions rather than, choosing that single framework to solve, all the needs and everything of the organization. And so what I'm going to do is look at the modern analytics that we can use. And something that's near and dear to me is, looking at governance, but more importantly, having it at scale, which is, part of Microsoft's hybrid approach to data mesh and data fabrics. So let's have a look at some of the stuff. So Microsoft, it's got to be clear that, when it comes to this kind of stuff, we're looking at the strategic vision of what a company wants to do, as opposed to, where we have a framework, we build another framework, and then, it's handed over to clients. And what we want here is the specific needs of the clients. What we will do later in the session, so Martin Kearney will go a lot more deeper into this a little bit later. And so we basically, Microsoft looked at what was the North Star of implementing modern analytics ecosystem and aligning it to people and process. And if some of you notice, I'm wearing a t-shirt, it's a Microsoft t-shirt, by the way, that has the word DevOps on it. And one of the things that, I live and breathe is DevOps, but more importantly, how to encompass data into DevOps processes. And, key to that is both people and processes. Quite often people focus on the technology, but forgetting, how important process is. Alrighty. So the other aspect of this is looking at, the aspects of data mesh and data fabric. And again, this isn't about being purists. Basically, what we want to do, or rather Microsoft wants to do, is that we want to take a lot of what organizations are doing that may have already implemented data mesh and data fabric technology and what have you, and build on that. And so what we'll do is I'm going to do the intro of this, and then Martin will go into some of the deeper stuff. Right. Alrighty. So in Fabio's session, we heard about clients, the CDOs, the chief data officers, data directors, basically looking for ways that we can build on the data and analytics that have been, the foundation of an organization, but also how people have operationalized those things. And so now we want to look at taking things from where we have that raw data into a data product. And so we want to make sure that, underpinning all of that is infrastructure that is going to support our needs. And so that's part of the equation. The other side of this, as I mentioned before, is data governance. And, there's some really great things that Microsoft have looked at using, in terms of incorporating machine learning and AI that would help build these insights. Because a number of times that I work with clients where data governance is just too unwieldy and not being, they can't do it. Whereas these days, we can leverage machine learning techniques and AI to start looking at the really important aspects of data governance. So basically what we need to go through is finding the right data for the project that we're working on. And again, looking at how important data governance is, because there's always that cost associated with implementing any of these technologies. Part of this, and one of the questions before was around where does data, where does a data engineer fit into this? And we have to look at the costs of both, the technology as well as bringing on some of those new roles that may not have existed before. And in fact, when I was preparing for this session, I remember October last year, I talked about, data platform engineering and data engineering, how it's the evolution of, your typical data professional, say, a DBA or whatever. But yeah, there's a whole heap of things that we need to look at, in terms of the ingestion of our data, the engineering, and also, how we can be agile in terms of improving the way in which we transform and understand, the data that we have. Because all of this, the reason why we're doing this is to be able to enable the business, right? And often when I talk to people, it's understanding how important data is becoming to turn businesses into data-driven businesses, and how literally how important that is for all of us, not just people that make those business decisions. We have a vital part in providing that platform that they can. Alrighty, let's talk about traditional. So I'll start off with this traditional approach, and then we'll take this and then we're going to evolve it into data mesh. So basically, a lot of times people have already implemented, a modern data warehouse, or, Fabio talked about, Hadoop was one of the choices. And basically, we may be looking at migrating from what is our traditional data warehouse and Hadoop scenario. And basically, we're going to look at, the sort of architecture of how the data gets in through, say, Azure Data Factory on the left there, land it in some form of data lake, and, we're going to start cleaning the data using Spark, and then hosting that data in a data warehouse. And then, of course, on the right-hand side there, we're going to have, our report team who will consume this data and, taking it to provide insights for our line of businesses. So basically, we want to take what we have here, we build these projects for the different lines of businesses, but the big challenge that we have here is that we're not actually the experts. We deal with data, and it's that transformation into information, that we don't completely understand. And so it's kind of like this handover process, or a handshake of sorts, where we're transferring, the knowledge that the line of businesses have. And we actually want to transform this, instead of the siloed approach, to being more of a collaborative or shared service. And that's a massive challenge. It's, if I've been on projects where this takes months to years, and over that time, technologies change, approaches change, what have you. And so we're trying to cram all this stuff into this technology stack. And, one of the problems, and I talked about it before, people and process, we have you can have the best technology, but it comes down to how how we can orchestrate, all these technologies, and also projects, because we'll have a number of projects that might be using our platform. So, we need to look at how we can enable the business so that, they can build their own dashboards and reports. We now have data scientists who, they know all about the data, but we need to, again, enable them so that they can build their own machine learning, models and what have you, that, again, are built on the platform. What's happened here? Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. So what we're doing is we're going to evolve, you know, from this monolithic approach to to kind of a federated one. And so, you know, the existing implementation, we had, you know, that shared service domain, and we're not going to completely remove everything from it and replace everything, but, you know, if we look at this, our lakehouse is still the foundation, and so we want to continue on with that lakehouse implementation and approach in terms of where we ingest the data and create the data breaks. But we need to ensure that, you know, the ingestion frameworks are still there, but we also want to look at how we can start moving to the domain zone architecture. Alrighty, so let's drill down a bit. So part of this is we're going to start federating so that we're building the different domains for the different lines of businesses. And so you'll see here, you know, we have our shared services, we have a marketing domain zone, innovation domain zone. Down the bottom, we have finance, operations, and engineering. And so we can still keep all of our shared services within one domain zone, but we can actually start splitting those zones out. So enabling, you know, the marketing team or line of business, where they may have their own data engineers, and, you know, they may even have their own data scientists that, you know, they're very capable in terms of understanding that line of business, but also we're going to provide that platform where we can have some form of agility, where we're iterating through developing and deploying the different insights that they may require. But also, you know, some of those will be ad hoc, right? So the one-offs that we need to go for whatever need crops up. So we want to look at, you know, building these domains, but we also, down in the middle here, we want to keep the data inside, you know, that sort of central data storage, and, you know, we want to create tenants per domain so that we can, you know, have our different lines of businesses. They can have, you know, their own standard tenant storage that, you know, they will build their data products off of. This is a fairly big slide, and I'll be talking to it for a wee bit. So what we're doing here is, you know, as we look at the different aspects of the domains, those, as I mentioned, are aligned to our different lines of businesses, and again, they can start building their data products that are projects that, you know, eventually will be related to their dashboards, as well as, you know, reporting that is associated with, say, machine learning. And what we have here is a whole heap of, you know, things coming into our zones. And so if we look at this, we have three components. So we have the federated analytics implementation, which, you know, comprises of our data zones and our, you know, our polyglot data store. And what this does is it, excuse me, defines the domain-driven architecture that provides the ability to implement data and analytics at scale, and that's a key thing. While, again, we want a unified ecosystem, but we also want to leverage and provide different data and analytics services to each of these domains. And basically this comes down to, and you may have heard of it, where we democratize the data. And basically it allows us to both democratize the data and democratize the analytics associated with that data to, again, the lines of businesses. So again, this is providing that platform that enables the business as opposed to, again, having that true siloed approach. Talked about data governance, and again, doing this at scale for the enterprise basically establishes the foundation for implementing both for multi-cloud as well as, those hybrid environments where you've got stuff still on premises as well as embracing, the true aspects of cloud. And basically it allows us the capability to both automate and manage the metadata, data classification and lineage. And, the number of times where some of the hurdles that people have is, you can't build the infrastructure on premises. So you will look at leveraging aspects of the cloud to do some of the things that are really hard on prem. Like I talked about before, using machine learning and AI for data governance. It is very time consuming and, let's be honest, costly to actually try and do that on prem. Automation, massive thing that drives me daily. We want to provide different mechanisms as well as data services or microservices to automate, the operations associated with our data. But also we want to meet the needs of the organization. And again, we want to democratize data. We want it available for all, and improve sort of what I'd say is data liquidity, being able to move that right throughout. The things that I will talk to here is, there are security requirements around all this. I talk about how making it free and easy for all, but there is still a massive requirement to have security in place so that, only the appropriate lines of business can see, the actual data associated with those. Right, enterprise data governance. Talked about this just briefly. So one important thing that's really critical, and whenever I am involved in terms of acquiring data for clients, and the most critical aspect of this is classifying the data. And, we need to know what confidential data you have. And we need to know that, with confidential data, we've got to ensure that we can classify it and understand what we, are both acquiring, transforming, whatever. And so if we can actually have the ability to automatically scan data sets across the organization, whether it's on premises, in Azure, or some of those other public cloud providers, we need to be able to do that, because otherwise we can't scale. Doing things manually is not going to work. And especially the output of those scans, if we have identified that the data is confidential, we then need to apply, policies across that so that, we are ensuring that, we have the appropriate security in place, the data owner for that particular subset of data and what have you is, applied. And again, we need to use automation around this. Part of this is capturing, what metadata we have, as well as knowing the lineage of our data. That is key. As we go on, this is all about iterative approaches, and we want to use predefined as well as custom rules. but also, you know, fine tuning those and, you know, again, feeding into automation. And also, you know, one of the things that we need to consider is part of those data policies. You know, we may look at something like masking data, you know, automatically. Where it's been classified automatically, we're then going to mask it automatically if it has been, say, identified as confidential. And I guess, you know, moving through this, we are going to move to where we want to catalog our assets, our data assets, but we also want to feed into things like machine models and, you know, reporting like with Power BI and whatever. Part of this is ensuring that, you know, we have a business glossary, we have descriptions, and again, a key component of this, and this goes back to people and processes, we have the data owners. And so, you know, we will have a whole heap of thresholds and what have you associated with getting our data at source. So we'll look at, you know, what the min, max, and average is of our data. That feeds into, you know, measuring and implementing data quality, because we will have to clean up our data as we go through our data pipeline. So, you know, that is moving from the left of the slide right through to the right. And it's so, you know, vital that when we come to sharing that data, that we have, you know, all these things in place. And ensuring that, you know, our data catalog is up to date, and that we can actually track the lineage of our data, so that when we get, you know, to the right hand side there, that we are sharing that data, that we know that we have, you know, all those processes and procedures in place. Righty. One of the biggest challenges, you know, that organisations need to solve is basically the agility as well as the efficiency to serve data to the different line of businesses to create those data products. And the biggest challenge is, you know, is again that data ingestion. And I talked about data engineering. You know, that, you know, there are studies that say, you know, that could be 60 to 70% of the effort, time, and cost for the whole analytics cycle. And so understanding and appreciating that upfront, you know, around the data ingestion as well as that data engineering processes is where we need to focus a lot of our time. And so when we look at automation, I mean, the goal here is we want to use templates. And the goal is to automate our domain creation by using templates. And I'll talk about templates in the next slide. But one of the reasons why we want to use templates is that these can be used repeatedly. So once we have designed and created the domain creation by a template, we can now just stamp them out, right? We need to look at automating the process to onboard our data services, sources, which have been requested, you know, by our line of businesses. We also want to look at, you know, we have to be somewhat agnostic in terms of what we're ingesting, because as Fabio said before, you know, we can have non-structured and structured data, and, you know, it can come in all types of formats, you know, CSV, Parquet, TSV, whatever. But also we need to appreciate the type of data. So some of that data might be marketing data, Some of it might be HR, some of it might be operational, what have you. Key component for, automation is standardization. So where we want to format the data according to the organization standards, say. So for example, we might want to have deltas, or we might want parquet as an example. And part of this, and this goes back to good software development principles, we actually want to implement versioning of that data so that we can actually, backtrack and what have you. We also want to ensure that, we apply those data quality processes, looking at data deduplication, accuracy, and again, I talked about thresholds before, so we need to incorporate that as well. We also need to onboard, data sets, newly acquired data sets into the catalog so that they become discoverable as soon as the data lands in our ecosystem. And as always, we need to provision access defined by the lines of business, and we need to look at who will own the data, but also have access to the new data sets that we have created. So what we have here is our landing container down the bottom there. And basically, the landing container, as we've drilled down into each of these segments, basically the landing container is reserved for raw data, which has been loaded by some, again, data agnostic ingestion engine, or, some data application that we know this is from a recognized system of record, the source, and we have it in its original supported format. And what we then do after having that in our raw storage landing is we're then going to take it into the conformance container, which is just next to the landing one there in raw storage. And this layer is basically around containing the conformed data that has had those data quality processes applied to it. And as the data is copied into the landing container, what we have is we have the data processing and compute triggered to basically copy it from the from the landing container through to our conformance container. So we know that, we've got, we've had the rules applied and that data is now conformed to what we've defined. And as part of this first stage, the data is converted into Delta Lake format, and then we land it in, our input folder within that. Data quality is run, and, the records that pass are then copied into the output folder, and, for auditability, failed records will land into the error folder within that structure. So we've now landed it, it's now conformed. We're now moving on to the enriched layer, or basically, our second data lake. And what we can think of this is a filtration layer that removes, the impurities, but we could actually enrich our data within this process, hence the name. The standardization container that we have will hold both system records and masters. The folders within it are segmented first by subject area, then by entity. And data is available in both, merged partition tables, and, the end game here is that we want to optimize this for analytics consumption. Alrighty, so now that we've got our data flowing, it's basically getting into this polyglot data store, and basically the data is coming in as both structured data as well as unstructured, but there's also a lot of data coming into here from, on-prem. And so on the left there, we have operational databases, we have, a whole heap of things coming into our data store. And so what we want to do is look at our operational data, because we want to take this and modernize it for applications. And I see, do I have quite a few questions? Do I need to? Oh, okay. I just thought that there was. Cool. Thank you, Martin Kearney, for answering some of those. Alrighty. So yeah, on the left-hand side, we have, the data coming from shared services, and then what we're doing is combining it with, whole. So we'll have finance data, marketing data, and everything. We're combining those so that we can, again, the end game is building that data product, and basically we're doing this within, this massive polyglot type data store, that again is coming from different domains, and then we're going to take this and architect for it. And so let's look at the architecture that we will take the data from the polyglot data store. And yeah, cool. Sorry. Yeah, so as I said before, we're taking all these things, bringing them together in our massive, polyglot data store. Cool. Right, domain architecture. This can be quite complex, and one of the biggest challenges that Microsoft would like to solve is how we're going to simplify, our traditional architecture, where basically we assemble, all these pieces, all these services and what have you, kind of like Lego blocks, to build this whole environment. And basically this traditional approach in the real world takes a whole heap of resources. We have a whole heap of different and sometimes disparate skills to ensure that, on the left-hand side here, we have all these enterprise requirements. We have to have security and privacy. Governance and compliance is core to what we're doing. We need to have things available, and also we need to be able to recover, right? The skills and training associated, with all of these different technologies, as well as, licensing. One of the hardest things associated with any technology is actually the licensing. But core to this, key to this is being able to monitor and observe what's going on. So basically, Microsoft innovated this to solve the problem we have here. We have all this technology and everything by bringing Azure Synapse Analytics, which is a product with, all the core services here. So let's have a look at that offering. Alrighty. Now I think there's another bit here. Oh yeah, cool. I talked about before, so Azure Synapse Analytics is basically a fantastic ecosystem where we have all of our integration orchestration, and the cool thing about this is that we can build on the same code base that we might have had in Azure Data Factory in the traditional approach. And so we're not actually introducing anything new, but what we are doing is we're building on this. And so Azure Synapse is basically packaging all of this together for you so that, you know, we have all of the things associated with this. And the great thing is, you know, we can build on all of this. And, you know, something that's this started a long time ago in PDW, you know, the SQL data warehouse that years and years ago was, you know, that one ecosystem. But in fact, yeah, cool. So what we have here is basically a single user interface for our analytics platform. We have data warehouse with machine learning support. It builds on top of Apache Spark for, you know, data engineering and machine learning. We have our time series database with, again, machine learning. And the cool thing is this is all built, you know, over serverless computing. We have, you know, all of our integration pipelines there. And, you know, we're moving right through to data exploration with Azure Data Explorer, or ADX there. And, you know, this has been shown to simplify both the domain and line of business provisioning by at least 70%. And it's really easy to deploy. You know, you deploy it and the underpinning technologies are deployed with it. The great thing is that Azure Synapse Studio has a whole range of templates. And I talked before about how important templates are. And we have, you know, the type of templates that you have will be agriculture templates, automotive templates that are geared towards different, you know, sectors. And so there's 11 database templates within Azure Synapse Studio that you can use. And yeah, basically this encompasses everything into that ecosystem that we can use. Cool. This is my last slide. Basically, if we look at, you know, the different planes that they've defined on the left-hand side there, basically we have 3 composable solutions which are aligned to, you know, industry recommended data mesh layers of architecture. And, you know, if you look at the definition or, you know, documentation on data mesh, there's the 3 planes on the left. Basically, these equate to data governance, you know, which is where we're talking about at the data product plane. You know, how do we create, how do we read, you know, the version, secure the data, and we need to include that in our data operations. And basically the key thing associated with all of this is the automation, because, you know, if we look at the utility plane, you know, how do we know, looking at that, you know, that we have the right VNet setup or virtual networks? You know, a key component of DevOps is continuous integration and continuous delivery. You know, how do we provision all these things? We need to look at access control. That is absolutely vital for our data transformation processes. And so, you know, again, I talked about templates, and we want to use templates as much as we can, because, you know, over on the right hand side there, we're going to automate almost all the things. And, you know, I talked about how Synapse is made things a heck of a lot simpler. And, you know, we can now deploy an analytics environment to basically cater for all of the different transformations that we want to, rather than having, you know, those 15 technologies that we're kind of stitching together with string. We now have a proper ecosystem. the best news is that Martin is going to, you know, show you how you can apply and build a data mesh in his session. So I am going to hand over to Martin now. Oh no, sorry, we're going to have a 5-minute break. Let me just see what questions we have, if there are any that are there. Alrighty. Oh, nice. Oh, thank you, Fabio. I see you've included a whole heap of stuff. Oh yeah, I will answer the one question here around designing. The question was, can we design data mesh solution with Azure Resource Manager templates or ARM templates? You sure can. But in fact, there's a couple of ways that you could do this, right? So ARM, I'm a data person, sort of, you know, like ARM is written in JSON, and as a true data professional, JSON is an anathema to me, sort of. Whereas I write these days in, say, Bicep. So Bicep is an extension of ARM templates. But to answer your question, yes, you absolutely can. I also use Bicep, and I don't know if it's appropriate, but I'm going to say it anyway. I also use Terraform. I am a fan of Terraform. Because, you know, I can do on-premises stuff with Terraform, and I can do, you know, multi-cloud. But you can definitely create some of the data mesh solutions with ARM templates. If you understand JSON, I don't. Go for gold.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hamish. No, guys, we're gonna have a 2-minute break. And then Martin is going to continue with the session talking about specifics around data mesh and how that is applicable to cloud scale analytics. See you soon. Martin, you can take control.
Cool. We've got control.
Martin, ready when you are.
Okay. Let's get started. So let's move on to actually looking at how we start to do some of the data mesh implementations for cloud scale analytics. So the first set of slides I'm going to look at today is, you know, how we apply data mesh into your organization. So let's crack on with that. So one of the common questions when designing a data mesh architecture is, you know, how do we separate out the various data domains? What's the right way to do that, to ensure that the data is decentralized, it's aligned to the appropriate domains, and in the end, it makes the development teams responsible for their data from the whole end to end, from birth to death, effectively through the whole ecosystem there. And that's probably one of the most difficult things, particularly for data people to get hold of. I mean, application people have probably been doing it for years with microservices, with that understanding of what the right boundaries should be within the domain-orientated designs. Excuse me. So how do we start to think about it in terms of data? You know, how should we be modeling our data domains? And probably the starting point is really to go back and understand the problem scopes that you're dealing with. What's the whole reason for building your analytics system in the first place? What are you trying to address within your organization? What does your organization do to start with? Does it have any specific capabilities? What's the business architecture that's in place around that? And we'll find that if we start to look at aligning with those business capabilities and functions, they've generally been created in your organization to deliver specific business objectives and outcomes. So aligning our data domains with those functional areas is probably going to give us a good starting point there to look at and to design a suitable data domain architecture that's going to work and align with the business goals and objectives. So an example on here, some of you who've used some of the example Microsoft databases have probably seen Tailwind Traders crop up before. And we're going to use that throughout the rest of the session today as our example company. So one of the potential way that breaks down with the functional domain split with Tailwind Traders, we can say we start to build it into a number of primary segments. So customer services management here at the top, our staff and personnel management as the next one, travel management, as that sort of type of business, that's important for them. They're in the process of selling tickets for travel. And then the supporting services, things like IT service management and cost management, etc. in here. And within that, within each of those main functional areas, we can see the specific objectives that they're trying to do. So if we look into our customer services management again, being able to do online ticket management and customer services, for example, being two very critical components of what they do. So to be successful, Tailwind Traders is going to need to be able to do online ticket management. Without that, I'm not going to succeed as a business. If they can't sell them to their customers, and they end up going out of business themselves. So without what you also find, the people in your organization as well, they also tend to be organized around these functional boundaries. You've got your team that works with selling tickets. You've got your team that works with marketing. You've got your team that works with IT, cost management, for example. Around that, they also tend to also have their own very specific vocabulary and language and how they refer to everything within the work that they do. So again, you start to get these nice boundaries, nice logical boundaries that look as though they'd fit very, very well for having a very specific data domain around that and starting to develop their own specific analytics that they can use to their particular language, define what they're looking for out of the data. And that really makes a great starting point for identifying what a suitable set of data domains should be for our organization. When we start to build that out into practice, what does it then start to look at? So from our functional diagram in the previous slide, we can now then start to see what might be particular components of that as we go into our various data domains. In this one, again, we can see a couple of samples in here. So we've got our online ticket management as our first data domain on the top. And we can see there's a lot of transactional systems that are probably feeding into this. It then gets, the data is transformed, integrated, cleansed, etc. as it moves through there. And from that final piece of integration, we then produce a data product. Now, the data product we can think of as being our nicely cleansed data. It's in a proper schema format. It's all cleaned up the way that we need it, and it's there ready for the end users to actually consume and build their analytics from it. Likewise, for the the partnership one, again we can see another different set of transactional systems at the start. In this case, we're using Synapse as the ingestion flow here. But again, at the end of the day, what we're producing is yet another data product. On the right-hand side, though, interestingly, for customer services here, we find that they're actually taking the data products from the other two on the left, further integrating those, further combining those, building additional data sets on top of that, and refining the data further, as you can see in here, applying a machine learning model on top of that as well. And again, producing a final data product at the end here. So what we see from that is that our data consumers can also become data producers. So the way we do this, the reason for splitting this down and creating these various data products is a way that we remove cross-domain dependencies. Each of these can effectively sit on its own as a data product and allow any other parts of the business to reach into that and make use of it and say, hey, that's actually really, really valuable for what I want to do. Thanks for doing all the cleansing work. You've prepared it all nicely for me. All I need to do is just take that, build it in with everything else I need to combine, and off I go to build my own separate data product for what I need there. So we get that nice decomposition, alignment of the data to our functional parts of the organization, but all of these independent data products that sit out there and ready to be consumed. So we heard earlier with Fabio, we talked about the landing zones in Azure. Now from this, the way it worked out, and as he mentioned, we've got the core data management landing zone. That's the bit that's containing all our shared operational systems. So our Purview instance in there, our data quality system. We'll probably have some bits of Key Vault in there, retaining some of the core secrets that are needed at that whole organizational level there. And we can see from the diagram, again, that's built on top of the cloud adoption framework. Each of these are then a subscription boundary. So again, as Fabio described, that's that nice way of having that separate management, security, etc., that keeps everything nice and clean between things there, but groups everything up as we need it. Now, for an example in here, this is just one particular data mesh pattern where we've got a single landing zone. So we can see this on the data landing zone, everything's packaged into one in there. So even down to our individual data domains in here and our data products, they all still exist in the same data landing zone. So you can do it that way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. However, what you have to be aware of is that anything that you're applying at the data landing zone level in this one is going to be common across all of your data domains. Now, it might be that that is perfectly suitable for what you need, but if you need to get that extra bit of control, you can start to looking at building out multiple data landing zones. And there's various reasons, why you might want to do some of this. Some of them are technical restrictions. Some of them may be governance restrictions. You may have one set of data that is constrained by data sovereignty rules. Your data is going to have to stay in a particular Azure region, which might not fit with the remainder of the landing zones. They might fit into other geographical regions. So you start to enhance your architecture. You start to take your other aspects into account there, and start to look at where your landing zones may have to be. Some of the concepts there, in technical sense of you want to minimize your cross regional traffic. So if you are a global organization, you may want to have that as one of the considerations where you start to build your landing zones into both a functional and a regional based approach. The great thing is that it gives you all of that variation. You can still build that the way that you need and want to fit into your own organization. So as you spread it out, you may see that there's even more landing zones being functionally and regionally aligned in this case. And it is separate. I was expecting we had that embedded into there, but what we have is a bit of a demo through this of looking at Purview as a control for a data mesh architecture. So let's kick this demo video off for you. And what we start to see first of all is we'll have a look at the the data map. I'm going to pause it here so I can talk through what we're seeing in this. With the, the configuration that you've got with Purview, we start off at the top here where we have our whole organization. Now, what we looked at in the previous slide, where we started to see those different data landing zones within our architecture, we can have that alignment within Purview as well. So we can see we start to have the next level down from here, aligning with our data landing zones. And then further down from there, we actually get into the component systems that exist in those landing zones. So for example, on the left here, we have our source system of being a SQL database here, which then feeds in through the lineage and through the processing that we do into a data product at the end of it down there. So if we continue on from that and let the video catch up, but we go back in and we'll have a look at the business glossary. And again, on the left down here, we can see that the groupings are done in that same data landing zone concept through there. I can click in and I have the description of things in the business language, and I can actually drill through to get back to that particular asset through there as well. If I come back into just browsing the assets separately, again, I can drill it down into those areas. And then down the left, I can scroll down and perhaps look at things with classifications. So in this case, we've done a custom classification to a data product. I can come through onto that. And the nice thing is I get that whole range of end-to-end managed through Purview, because now I can build the automation into this, where I can put a request in. I can say, hey, that's the data I'm looking for. I want to get access to it. I can start the process off here, kick things off with a request. That request can then go through, be approved, and ultimately give me access into that particular new data landing zone, or directly to that particular asset if needed in that sense there. We can even have our automation further enhanced, where we can build that out so the whole thing is automated, so that when the data owner receives our request, they can click on it, they can say, yep, I approve that. And what it can do is it can take my identity, it can add it into the appropriate security group and give me direct access to that. So basically simplifying our whole piece of processing there to get things through. I'm going to pause at that point and see if we've got any questions on that initial bit on data mesh. If there isn't, what we'll do, Fabio, is I think I will get you to jump straight on to the next section, and I will cover off the final concepts in the data mesh configuration with Azure and Cloud Scale Analytics.
There you go. No questions in the chat. The slides are on the screen here. You're ready to take control and keep going.
Go. Let's get going with that. So let's have a look at how we can actually do a physical implementation of a data mesh architecture. So again, we're running with the Tailwind Traders concept that we were just looking at previously. And what if we do, if we go to the short link that's shown here, our aka.ms/adopt/Cloud Scale Analytics, it gives us a whole heap of documents.
Sorry, I think you haven't taken control of the slides yet. Can you do that?
Is that no? That's still not. Where's my prompt to take control? There it is.
There you go. All done now.
Excellent. We're good now. And let me just tidy up my screen again a sec. Okay. Cool. So we've got the this link here will give you that initial starting point of all the documentation around Cloud Scale Analytics with data mesh and the guidance leading off from there. That's going to give us a whole heap of detailed information and how you plan it and go about implementing data mesh. The other part is also in the GitHub's repo. There's a whole heap of reference documentation in there. So it goes into even more detail around that and basically describes a reference implementation of data mesh down to the level of being able to actually give us a deployment into Azure through that, or we can take those DevOps pipelines and everything from there, and we can customize that. If we need to do something, that is specific to our organization, that's slightly different from the reference architecture, again, we can take this. We can take a fork off this repo so that the core aspects of it, that we get the benefits of retaining those, and we can add our own customizations on top of that and be able to trial that in. The great thing is it's going to give us a secure end-to-end setup with everything, and the whole deployment has been tested and validated with numerous customers as well to be able to get that. What it starts with is giving us a data management zone and our data landing zones. And from that, we've got some level of immediate customization that can go through from there. Further to that, we can expand it out. We can start to look at additional layers that we need to put on top of that. But it's all starting from that foundation that we've got of a solid data landing zone and data management landing zone. So again, looking at the options that we might look at here, we start with our data management zone. We can have one or many data landing zones. They can be regionally aligned if we have to. So we might be looking at something which, for GDPR, for example, needs to exist in Western Europe. And the great thing is it gives us the flexibility to start with just a single data landing zone. We don't have to do it for multiple zones. We might just have the one that we're starting with. So we can start small and then we can add into it. We can add in our additional ones as we develop our analytics platform further. There's a clip here which shows how detailed the documentation page is in the GitHub repo. And as you come down, we get these deploy to Azure buttons for the particular reference architecture that we're looking at. What that does is it leads us into a custom Azure portal deployment. So once that catches up, we'll see that then starts to just prompt us for the core information. So things like what subscription are we deploying it to? What name are we going to use? How many data landing zones? What prefix are we going to use to make sure that we've got uniqueness across our resource names that flow through everything from there? So it flows then into our data landing zones. How many do we want to do? Do we start with just the one, or do we do many? And again, the same sort of things in there around the naming standards that we intend to use, how we can actually implement that. At the end, the usual approach of Azure-based deployments through the portal, we get to do a final verify at the end, and if everything's okay, we click go, and at the end of that, we have our architecture deployed. We have it built out into the various subscriptions we need with the resources that we want to use within those parts of the platform. All of it built in a highly secure manner. With the whole structure end to end. And very quickly, what that looks like when we get to into that. This just gives you a quick tour through the sort of structure you get. So we see we've got the two subscriptions on the left-hand side for our management landing zone and our data landing zone. We've got various resource groups there, which then segment again further the actual resources that we need to apply. So for example, with Purview, there's a separate resource group simply for Purview and its associated components there. We can see that it's restricted, that there's no public access to things. Everything's connected through private endpoints, and all the related network connections that Purview needs are collected together in that particular resource group. Likewise, we can start to look at the other aspects. If we need to deploy Docker images, we can have a container resource group, and that just expands out to other aspects there. So again, everything is nicely separated, nicely segmented, follows all of the best practices that are defined for Azure, and allows us to have that deployment and start off with our environment in a great condition and ready for use. The last bits there I will leave for you to look through later on the decks, and it's how we're getting a bit tight on time. Again, there's just a couple of demos in there of looking at how the whole architecture finally ends up, so we can see how things sit in there and how you would add an additional data application into the whole environment. Question from Shane. When I've tried these templates out before, we need tenant root level owner access. Are there any plans to integrate this with Azure ID, PIM, or Cloud Knox? Fabio, I might actually throw that one to you to see if you know what the roadmap is coming down with that in terms of the deployment permissions.
Right. If I understood correctly the question, yes, some of the resources may require tenant kind of privileged access. You can use PIM to elevate your access just before deployment. I believe the request for elevation is not included as part of the template. I think you have to manually request elevation of privileges before deploying the templates. That's what I know.
And the other aspect on that is that at this level, it probably should be your Azure admin group that is doing the deployment for you at this stage, and then granting out that access for the sub-levels of the components. So into your data management landing zone, your data landing zones, it would then be specified groups that would have the permissions constrained within those, and hence the benefit of having those in their separate subscriptions. So you then start to delegate down the permissions further down the track and give you the full power of what you need in the area that you need it. So you've got that proper separation of duties as well.
That's right. That's right. So thank you, Martin. So I would like to bring Hamish back to the session and join myself and Martin here for a panel discussion. Look, the stage is now open to all of you who remain with us in the session, and start asking questions about the content that we've covered here today, or any other question that you may have in mind about the implementation of cloud scale analytics in the way we described today, or any data mesh questions related to how you're seeing that in the market. So please be my guest to jump in and ask your questions.
Hi, Fabio. This is Kishore.
Hey, Kishore. How are you going?
Good, thanks. I have a quick question. What do you see in terms of implementing this data mesh? What's the typical time frame we see from the customer point of view? That's the first thing. I want to understand the time frame. If it's like enterprise organization you're working for, or you want to implement this data mesh solution, what would be the typical time frame we are looking, like in the 6 months, 1 year, or are we going to take the data mesh approach as a typical what do you call, like a cloud analytics platform, where you take a use case by use case and build the scale in, scale out architecture, right? So is there something we can do that kind of design in data mesh? That's one thing. And second question is more around the I think we also covered the complexity of data mesh, right? So how in terms of security and sharing the data between domains and the thing. I think something maybe I might miss. Is there something we can share the different domain data to third parties outside the organization? Like previously, how we do is through data share or something. Is it still a part of those things in data mesh as well?
Okay.
Can I can take one of those first of all, Fabio.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, go for it.
So as we covered in my session, I talked about being able to just start with that single data landing zone. So where you're looking at it of an enterprise deployment, what you might find is that it is easy to identify the first domain that fits in with the organizational structure. And as soon as you've properly identified one domain, then you can go ahead and actually do the deployment. You can have that set up and ready to go. And then you're looking at just your regular build time of, what's the right metadata-driven ingestion, how do you do your cleansing, that sort of stuff through the process there. But yeah, absolutely, you can start with one area, and then all you do is just, as the next bit comes on board, you just deploy a new data landing zone, and then open that up for those developers to start building out their ingestion flows and their analytics, and moving it end to end through that way. And what I didn't cover, but the last demo, you'd see deploying a data application, probably answers your second question, because you can customize that to what you need as well. So if data share is a component of your data product, then absolutely it just fits into that, and you can open that out and have data share available. So that, yes, you can expose it to third parties, but again, controlling that through Azure AD as well. So you can still limit it as to what third parties then get access, through their identities federated into your Azure AD.
That's right. So just adding, just adding to what Martin just mentioned, right? So specifically around the adoption of data mesh, there's always the people, process, and technology, the three pillars that make up most of the decisions around technology projects. So let me just talk about a little bit about the people inside, the people and process side of the decision, right? From a technology perspective, we gave you an explanation today around how the cloud scale analytics tell you how you should organize your Azure environments, what kind of artifacts should be there, how the networking connectivity is going to work between the data domains. So from a technology standpoint, we have some guidance in terms of how you implement data mesh. However, the most complex part of implementing data mesh as part of the adoption process of any organization is the alignment of data domains with business units, and train people around data governance and have the right skills and understanding of responsibilities that they will have in this federated way of managing data, right? So if it take, how long this is going to take? Well, how long is a piece of string? It really depends on the level of maturity of each organization and the budget allocated to this kind of work and the skills present in the organization to conduct such change management exercise. But it's clear that there is a people and process alignment around data mesh. Zhamak Delghani book was just released a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken. And in her book, she defines data mesh as a social technical framework. So not just a technical framework, but a social technical framework, just illustrating how important the people and process part is. So again, it's of course that we Microsoft, we're going to work with our customers and partners to help with this process and transition, to help with the decision. When you get to the technology, we have the guidance, but there is a people and process that needs to be observed as well.
Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Martin.
My pleasure, no problems. So Bernard, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, I'm really thankful that you've actually just said that about their structure, because to me, and I'm a big fan of the ThoughtWorks Zhamak's data mesh, that many organizations are claiming to be data driven, or claiming to have that objective, but they actually have the same structure or organization structure they've had for decades, especially a lot of government agencies. And they have these domains, these business units that just don't have any technical skills at all. And they have a IT department that's locking everything down and taking control. And it's going to be really hard to just to squeeze into these organizations to start evangelizing about data meshing. And the technology, whilst it's quite complex, will not actually be that hard to master. It's that organizational change is fundamental here. And I just wanted to reiterate that. And I'm really thankful you mentioned it, because I'm still scratching my head how to get around that.
Yeah, look, data mesh as a concept, this concept of federated data ownership, it's not new, right? It predates data mesh, right? The ability to have federated data models is not a recent thing. The pillars and the methodology that Zamax introduced in her book started back in 2018. I believe that was when she first introduced the concept, and the first formal literature came with her book just 2 months ago. So that's still kind of a relatively new framework of principles to be followed. And you're absolutely right when you say that it's not going to be an easy exercise for organizations to align legacy. I don't actually use the word legacy because sometimes you pick that as a pejorative thing. But when I say is the traditional way that companies have been organized into departments and business units, not necessarily are the same way that data domains will be working in a data mesh. So you can either you're going to have to either ideally align the organization to be data driven and finally have an organization aligned to domains, right? Or non-ideal, compromise your data domains because changing the organization is going to be too hard. And then you're setting up yourself to failure because it may not work in a long to medium term, right? So look, I would say that we already have very large organizations on its way to implement data mesh, right? Following the principles. Too early maybe to tell if they are being successful in this approach or not. But we have, for example, a very large financial organization here in the Asia Pacific area who are about to have the first data product following this implementation, right? But I must say that they are a very large organization with a very large budget. They can invest in data governance and in education, and they have the ability to keep running the business while they are actually reshaping the organization. I would say that maybe not everyone, not every organization will be able to do that, right? So that's why it's very important that when you look at data mesh, don't look at just technology as a data architecture only thing, but be mindful that there is a people and process and organizational alignment that comes with it, right? So that's my take.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Any other questions from the team? All right, so if there are no other questions, we are 15 minutes over time. I would like to thank everyone for joining today and thank you for the patience as we walk through this content around cloud scale analytics. Thank you so much, Hamish and Martin, for your contributions and for your expertise and experience leading your sessions today around the topics. And thank you, Sarah, for organizing the session. Sarah, over to you. Sarah, are you there? I think we lost Sarah. All right. So again, thank you so much, team. You guys have a great night, and I see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fabio. Thanks, Sarah, for the opportunity.
Yep. Same. What Martin said.
Thank you all.
Take care. See you. Bye.